Okay, it's another episode of Rise Up with Marc Mixon. Hello, Adam.
Hello, Mark.
How have you been this week, sir?
I've been good. How about yourself?
I have been good. It has been certainly a busy week. Feels like I haven't stopped running all week. But start of a new college semester, and we've talked about my pathological need to make sure every second of my day is booked just beyond my capacity to live up to my commitments.
I wouldn't expect anything else from you, Mark. That's just the way that you move. So
it is always. It seems like it's always been. Yeah, I've given up on the idea that I'm gonna ever have any free time, because when I do, I make sure to fill it. It's been
right.
Yeah. So it's been a busy week. I'm gonna start off with our Patreon. Well, maybe not Patreon. I'm gonna start off with the self-pimping. That's what it is. The likey subscribey. The likey subscribey. Yeah, please, rate this podcast highly. Share it with your friends. Like, subscribe, comment if that's a thing. I guess it's a thing because we're live streaming this episode. So
yeah, please post some comments. Try to be respectful.
Engage with the show, and smash the like button. Is that the terminology? That's the terminology.
Yeah, smash that button.
Why is it smash that button rather than just saying like? I don't understand.
I don't know. I think it's actually like a cliched kind of thing now, but it is still accurate.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm old. I don't pick up on all those trends a little late. So yeah, please engage with the podcast, right? We're out here trying to help those of you who are doing the work. So engage with us. Do we have the website on there? We don't have the website on there. No. Wait, website. I meant email. Boy,
email.
Boy, it's let me tell you, it's a day, man. So go ahead and drop us a line at riseupwmark@gmail.com if you want to offer some suggestions, if you have a guest you'd like to hear, if you yourself are an activist or an organizer who's out there working to change the system, we'd love to hear. Oh, look at that. We got the other banner. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And you can follow us on the socials. I'm mildly interact on the platform formerly known as Twitter, and there is a TikTok account, which I have not posted anything to yet, but I do watch TikTok videos at this point now. That is such a time killer. Holy smokes. I didn't realize that short form video, like I open it up and I just sort of start flipping through, but next thing I know, like 45 minutes have gone away. It's it's a terrible thing.
Yeah, it's a scary world. We are being programmed every day.
It is shorter and shorter attention spans, and that's part of their plan, right? Keep us isolated, keep us distracted, keep us too busy so that we can't get out there and do the real work needed to help us all rise up.
Absolutely.
I'm going to use that as the segue to start talking about today's guest.
Excellent.
It's a friend of mine, a gentleman that I work with. This is Fig is an organizer, activist with the West Seattle Mutual Aid Party, which I think I might have mentioned on the podcast. It is one of the mutual aid groups that I participate with. West Seattle is my particular section of the city. It's bigger than a neighborhood. If you're in the New York City sort of mindset, you could call West Seattle a borough of Seattle. It's not really, because it's not like a separate administrative entity, right? It's not, doesn't have its own sort of sectional government. Seattle's not arranged that way. But if we were, West Seattle would be one of the 5 boroughs of Seattle. Would there be 5? I think there might be. I think there might be.
Fascinating.
All right. Yeah, something we'll talk about at some future date. All right. But back to the West Seattle Mutual Aid Party. So this is a group that I do some of my mutual aid work with. It was one that I was pleased to discover recently. And oh shit. All right. I'm going to have to send a text message because I failed. I failed. I failed. Actually, I need to answer a call. This is going to be a weird live stream moment, everyone.
All right, live stream moment. Yeah, first of many, probably.
Hello, I am so sorry. I had a podcast thing change, and so I'm talking with you while I'm on the podcast, but I didn't want to leave you hanging. It's my fault. I absolutely should have called you. You were going to go down to Denny Park. Is that a true? Am I remembering correctly?
Yeah, something to eat from somewhere close, and then head down to the park to distro books.
Great. Could I?
Maybe I'll mute it just for a second so that we don't hear Mark's conversation on the phone. But yeah, looking forward to the show this week. This is going to be an interesting one for sure. And there's Mark back.
All right. So one of our previous guests, Medic Viv, called me because I was supposed to meet them and show them a venue where we can do a street medic training. But then we changed the time of this recording. And so I was supposed to be there at the venue to help Viv to show them the new venue for that street medic training. And we were just talking about how I keep myself booked beyond my capacity to live up to my my commitments. And there we go.
Real world example right there.
Real world example. So we will finish this podcast recording, and then I will go drop off some Narcan at West Seattle Mutual Aid Party, and then I'll run downtown to help bring it. That's a day off, right? Okay.
You should just put a GoPro camera on you and live stream what you do throughout the day. You probably get more people to watch.
Dear God. All right. So I apologize, or I don't apologize. That was a special exclusive behind the scenes image of what it looks like to be an activist and organizer doing the real work.
Yeah, we squeeze in the podcast when Mark has time. So
okay, so let's get back to it. I apologize for to our guest. Keep him waiting for a second, but let's go ahead and let's run our transition and come back with Fig from the West Seattle Mutual Aid Party.
Sounds good.
Some answers, a little bit of truth. Some answers, a little bit of truth. Some answers, a little bit of truth. A little bit of truth. A little bit of truth. Oh, dig deeper. Keep looking for the proof. Dig deeper. Keep looking for the proof. Dig deeper. Keep looking for the proof. Keep looking for the proof. Keep looking for the proof.
Okay, Fig, thank you so much for joining us today, sir.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
I am pleased to have you on, and I apologize for that little weird interruption.
Well, I personally am a big fan of Medic Viv's work that they and their collective have been up to for all of these years in our area. So it's certainly no skin off my nose for you to step away to take a call from doing something to support their efforts, because they are a huge integral part of the overall ecosystem that we've developed collectively here in the Seattle and greater Seattle area.
They really are. They are, following their work was one of those things that really started.
Sorry, my bad. It's the day of making mistakes. My mistake.
This is the behind the scenes day, right?
Yeah, it is.
But let's focus on the West Seattle Mutual Aid Party thing, a portion of the ecosystem that we've created here.
Mm-hmm.
So I've known you for a little bit now, not a whole heck of a lot of time because I'm relatively new to the West Map group. But it's a thing I've been excited to do, and I've been really pleased and encouraged by the work we're doing. For our guests, why don't you give a little bit of an introduction about who you are and how you got involved with West Seattle Mutual Aid Party?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think my my overall journey, like personal journey towards like community organizing and really developing my political understanding of the world started with Occupy. That kicked off. I was in my undergrad program at Boise State, and I'll be perfectly honest with you guys. I was like just I grew up in Maryland in a very like traditionally blue like Democrat state. I grew up like fancying myself as a Democrat, and I actually went to my first Occupy Boise General Assembly kind of the mindset like, oh, let's see what these goofballs are up to, like just that really like dismissive kind of like institutional perspective on social movements that is pervasive through like party politics in the US. And like by the end of that same General Assembly, I was in a couple different working groups already, like fully like just like 180. It was a real formative experience. But that, there's after that was crushed by the state, you had the kind of like lull afterwards in a lot of organizing. And it wasn't really till the Mike Brown and Ferguson uprising occurred. At that point, I was up here in Seattle, and that's what really kind of firmly started getting me rooted into the community here in Seattle with like-minded folks who are interested in organizing, in the interest of abolition and any of the other kind of like core social touch points that are really important to me. With as far as mutual aid is concerned, and West Seattle Mutual Aid Party specifically, a big part of what kind of initiated that process for me was on the personal level, my wife and I were fortunate enough to have an opportunity to become homeowners, and that whole process was really difficult to navigate and try to stay true to like any of the like ethical like foundations that I try to like keep for myself, because it is such a I just don't really even believe in private property, so it's hard to like go through that process without feeling kind of like a scumbag for me personally. But the big thing that we came away was that like we wanted to make sure that we didn't have enough house that there would ever be like empty space in it, that we would feel compelled to try to enter into a landlord relationship with somebody else. Otherwise we'd be wasting it. I mean, we had to make sure other people were getting value out of this asset that aren't in our household. And that kind of led itself towards the idea of converting our garage into what we lovingly have dubbed Club Anarchy, which is the main warehouse and supply hub for the mutual aid program. And yeah, like, so for me personally and getting started in mutual aid, that was really kind of the first stepping stone for me. I was like, all right, we have access to this asset, that we have like a self-imposed mandate that other people in our community need to actually be getting good value out of it, because of how like the property law is written and stuff. Like, we can't necessarily there's not necessarily an easy function to make sure everyone's getting like actual like equity out of it, the way our whole like society is based around like housing equity. But we did think that there was a pretty clear path forward to making sure that there actually was functional value being gained for multiple people outside of our household. And utilizing that space as a mutual aid hub was the most clear path forward to achieving that. So that was kind of what oriented my wife and I toward that initially. But we came into the house and we came into West Seattle with just that kind of vague goal, knowing that we wanted to achieve something like that with the space. But what really kind of initiated West Seattle Mutual Aid Party as a program was we had a big ice storm the first winter we were here. And us and one of our neighbors, co-organizers here at West Seattle Mutual Aid Party, and a good friend of mine who I'd worked on countless other projects over the years here in Seattle with, we knew there was people camped out on the Greenbelt over near West Crest, where the dog park is. And it was, we don't get too many winter storms here in Seattle that are more than just like one night worth of snow. But this was a persistent like week-long like snow and freeze. So we hiked back there during the snow. We connected with people. Number one requested item was propane. So we just started, like, we walked over in the snow to McClendon's Hardware, grabbed as many propane tanks as the two of us could carry, and just hiked them back there in the snow. Simultaneously, during that same winter event, we started our other co-organizer found somebody on one of the local Buy Nothing groups. Great resource. Mutual aid programs, and anybody who's trying to like build a logistical chain, the Buy Nothing groups, and it's a great way for finding like-minded folks as well. There's something about that, just the inherent acknowledgement that this is a Buy Nothing group that I think kind of self-filters a little bit for some like-minded ideas out of people you can find there. And that's how the two of us who had done that initial propane run got connected with one of our other kind of like foundational organizers, because we found them on there just independently since they knew it was cold out. You know, they put an ask in the Buy Nothing group for warm clothes and jackets and such to distribute on their own. We're like, hey, that seems like a cool person to get in touch with. They're obviously thinking along the same lines that we are during this weather event. And from there, we just started building. So it's been a journey for me. And I think the thing that ultimately brought me for wanting to put my the most amount of my personal organizing energy into the mutual aid direction versus some of the other movement work I've done before, which was much more like broadly oriented towards like popular social movements. I really was craving and needed an organizing project that was hyper local in scale. Neighborhood level rather than at the city level, where you're at the city level, you tend to be pulling from the same like smaller pool of like-minded folks who are already really politicized and motivated to take action. And that can be really helpful, but that also can create a burnout dynamic that is really like hard to counteract. And yeah, it's just a lot easier when the things you're doing are more at your neighborhood scale rather than scrambling around the city. So the need for a hyper local project for me to plug into, the need to utilize this asset that we had, and just the initial inertia of having just like one or two other like-minded people that I was pretty immediately connected with, kind of gave us the nuclei, I would say, to move this forward.
For any of our listeners that might not be familiar with the phrase or what it implies, can you give us how you would define mutual aid?
Yeah, so for me, mutual aid, one of the biggest challenges with the mutual aid, especially in its like I think current resurgence that we've been seeing, especially in the aftermath of the 2020 uprising, is it can be hard to delineate between mutual aid and charity, but that is one of the core elements of mutual aid. It's that mutual word, right? Like it's easy to give aid. Like we have a very like so much of like the like state's supposed social responsibilities have been shifted off onto like the charity like model. So it's something that most people are familiar with in our society. Whereas mutual aid, it has to be a collaborative thing. We really prioritize with here at West Seattle Mutual Aid Party consistency. Like, so we will choose if we're forced, like due to either resources or people power or other constraints, if we're forced to choose between visiting a new location where we've been notified that like, people who are living in tents or vehicles have shown up at versus showing up to like a same location where there's people that we've been connecting with for years at, we will always choose to prioritize the people who are already in the network. And that's never a great feeling, but what that does in the sense of mutual aid is that really lends itself to the mutual element because we're seeing the same people. It helps engender a sense of like collective ownership in the program with them. And I think one of the best examples with West Seattle Mutual Aid Party that we see every week is at our main location that we do our Saturday like survival program distro at, where we hand out and share supplies. There's an entire like crew of some of our regulars there that we've been sharing supplies with and supporting for years now. They've self-organized, so they have like there's a crew that just like is at our main location when all of our cars with supplies show up, and they have self-organized like their own little brigade to help get everything set up. Like they're a part of making the program happen at this point, rather than just people who are showing up to receive supplies. They are critical members of the program, and they they bring ideas to the table for how to try to help manage the crowd and keep things running smoothly. They help us out when we need help outside of the distro, because it's people in our neighborhood. You know, they're our friends just a couple blocks down the street from us in many cases. And that's really where the mutual side of mutual aid comes into it. And by remaining consistent and making sure we're staying at the very least in front of the same folks that we connected with initially who are still out here living without permanent shelter, which is most of them. We unfortunately don't get to enjoy too many success stories like through the states and like the city and counties, like mechanisms to supposedly move people out of homelessness. But that level of consistency has created an actual like sense of community. You know, we're not just, you know, we still are for plenty of people. Like you can't like, I don't think it does us any favors to sugarcoat it and pretend like that every single person who accesses our Saturday program for resources is a full-fledged participant. There are still people who access it just in just more of a charity like oriented relationship. I think that's more common for some of the households that are accessing us there's a language barrier. It's harder to build that mutual sense when there's a communication barrier, right? But you know, that's also okay. It's also totally fine if there's people who are accessing it kind of just in that regard at this point. But the hope is, going back to that consistency point, that through the process of consistently encountering these folks every single week, them becoming more familiar with our faces, us starting to break down some of those communication barriers, whether that's just through using Google Translate or, hopefully identifying people within their milieu who are showing up to connect with us every week, who can help translate, or like interpret and help break down those communication barriers. The idea is that through that process of consistency that we really kind of reinforce that mutual part of mutual aid and get more people involved. We've even had, folks who, some of our friends who are living in vehicles that we've been meeting with for a long time now every week. Some of them like do logistical tasks for us and have offered to do logistical tasks, whether that's picking up produce that is donated from a nearby farmer's market to bring it over to distribute or anything else. So it's about bringing this kind of like different energy to the neighborhood. But one of the fun things about mutual aid and how we've constructed West Seattle Mutual Aid Party in particular, which we'll probably want to get into here in a little bit, as far as like not choosing to not incorporate as an official nonprofit, to not chase grant money from the city, county, or state or anything like that, is one of the very first like instances where we get to see some of the initial like just different feelings that people will feel when we're connecting with them in a mutual aid orientation versus a charity orientation. Is when we're first making contact with like a new group of folks, there's always an immediate level of suspicion, and it's healthy suspicion, right? It's not like paranoid suspicion, because anybody who's been living without shelter and interacting with like state or local service providers has at least one bad story where trust has been violated. So when you come in as a new person into their space, into their homes, you roll up in somebody's living room basically and knock on their door to introduce yourself. I don't like it when random people knock on my door. It's always a little off-putting, right? So it's been a source of power for West Seattle Mutual Aid Party for making those initial connections, to be able to say, hey, we're just a group of random people from here in the neighborhood who want to come introduce ourselves to you guys and show some love and ask if you need anything, because we have, this logistical chain that allows us to bring supplies out every week. And that emphasis on, we're not with the city, like we don't get any money from any like government entity, is a huge initial trust builder with folks. And I think part of what is being demonstrated in that immediate change in disposition that you'll see with many of the folks in our first contact with them, when we tell them like, we're not like with a church, we're not with a nonprofit. I think that speaks towards like the difference between mutual aid and charity. And even if it can't necessarily be articulated by the folks in that moment, or they're not thinking about that, I noticed that, and like the change in their disposition immediately to me is like, oh, you just live up around the corner and you want to come do this, because almost all of their interactions with housed people who actually live around where they're staying are awful and negative
Right.
and like quite frankly frightening for them many of the times. So that that initial interaction is one of the best ways I can kind of like summarize it, because it's hard to do, and like it's the ongoing challenge, like preeminent challenge for anybody interested in mutual aid. How do we keep this from just being another charity that we're building? And I don't think there is like an end destination for it. I think it's just an iterative process that continues on and on and on, and it changes based on who's like, you know, coming into the network and what they need out of it. But I think the best way I can sum that up is that initial like introduction period to people. And it feels so almost like ephemeral. So I hope that's doing a good job of addressing the question. But I do, like, it's always one of the first things I say in an initial introduction to somebody who's living without shelter when we come up and introduce ourselves is I emphasize not a nonprofit. That almost immediately like builds some initial trust with them, just because if nothing else, it's often novel for them. And that novelty opens the door for, you know, a lot of interesting potential that, you know, folks might not have experienced before.
Yeah. We will get into like the whole collective versus incorporated sort of models here. But let's give me another moment before I quite get there. Because you said a lot of things there that I think are really interesting and important. One of the things I hear a lot when I'm doing like meal service downtown is like almost every week someone will ask, well, are you guys with a church? What church are you with? Right. Like, and they do think of it as being a charity. And that is also, you know, my response. And the common response there is like, no, we're just a group of neighbors who want to help.
Absolutely.
A group of neighbors who want to help. And something I think I saw on the Northwest Hospitality page about y'all, and Northwest Hospitality is one of West Map's or West Map's fiscal sponsor,
Yes.
right? That's how people can donate in a tax deductible fashion if they want to help and take that off their taxes. And yeah, we're going to get in there, but it says, you know, that our mutual aid is solidarity, not charity, right?
Absolutely.
And I really think that's an important distinction. I think early on in this show, I tried to define solidarity as, you know, standing together based on our shared interests. And people seem to have a hard time with what is a shared interest. They always take it as like, I'm going to have a hard time articulating this. You know, when and this is a thing I do. I'm a, you know, union thug, and I think that it is important to support unions. So when I am driving around on my way to work and I see teachers on strike, was a recent example, recent within the last year or so, right? Like I, you know, stop my car and I find some cardboard and make up a sign and grab my hard hat and walk the line with the teachers. Not because I have anything to gain from that particular action, but because I believe they deserve fair pay and conditions, because I believe I deserve fair pay and conditions. And you know, none are free till all are free. It's a sort of a cliched saying, but like if I deserve it, so do my neighbors, so do the other people in society, right? And so the same thing goes with helping those who have become unhoused or who society has pushed to the edge. Like I believe that I deserve to have a safe place to go at the end of the day. I believe that my family deserves to know where their next meal is coming from. And if I deserve that, so does everyone in my neighborhood and in my city and in our country, quite frankly. So I think that whole idea that, you know, like that this is solidarity. This is an action of solidarity. We are standing with our neighbors because we all have this shared interest in us being housed and clothed and fed, and for people who are farther on the right side of the spectrum, who like to talk about, quote, public safety, etc., like nothing makes our neighborhood safer than people having what they need.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that I always try to drive home, especially if I'm talking to somebody who's maybe a little more, let's say, to put it politely, antagonistic towards like the work that we do and the overall goals of it, is that under the current housing crisis and the way housing is treated as like the main, like the sole vehicle for like building wealth and like to build, like have as an asset and commodify, under this current system, everybody is suffering under it. But like whether that if you're housed or unhoused, we're both suffering, but in different ways, right? There are consequences of commodifying housing to such an extent that there are thousands and thousands of people living without permanent shelter in our city and county alone every night. That impacts all of us. It's just the negative impacts that somebody who is housed is feeling from this state of affairs is going to be very different than the immediate impacts that the people who are actually living without permanent shelter are. But at the end of the day, this is one problem that is causing one issue that is causing all of these consequences that we're all feeling in different ways. So that's one of the kind of like rhetorical devices that I try to like open up a little bit of space to build some shared understanding with somebody who might not be fully on board with the kind of work that we're doing. Right. And that kind of goes back to what is the mutual part that those of us who are housed and a part of this program, what are we getting out of it that actually makes this mutual, other than good feelings? Like, it does help me sleep at night knowing that I put in a lot of effort to, create to strengthen my community. But what is the actual mutual thing we're getting out of it beyond like feels? And there's a lot of power in knowing all the folks who are living, without shelter in my neighborhood. They watch out for us now that they know like us and where our homes are in the neighborhood. They let us know if like weird or sketchy stuff is going down. Who better to like know like what's going on in your neighborhood than the person who is outdoors in that neighborhood, like as a function of where they live, right? So they're, by developing this like sense of solidarity, like you're saying, and connecting with these folks in your immediate community, you're building this like base of solidarity that like really does feed back into but like creating a stronger sense of security for all of us, housed and unhoused alike, who are involved in this project. It's totally changed how I interact with my neighborhood. It's totally changed the conversations that I have, and like the amount of people that I just walking through the streets of the neighborhood I see and I know, because we've been sharing supplies with them. And to go back to your, I'm also a union member and a shop steward at my union. And I think a cool tie-in to West Seattle Mutual Aid Party and like the idea of solidarity and unionism is when during the last teacher strike, we had just started the program at that point. We had developed the supply warehouse, and there's a school right nearby where we keep all of our supplies based out of. So a couple of us during the pickets during that last Seattle Public Schools teacher strike, we went over there. We made a big banner, said like, West Seattle Mutual Aid Party supports our teachers. We rolled up with the supply wagon every day for the couple days they were doing the pickets. And in response to that, what the teachers did, because they loved having us there, it was such good energy on the picket line there, even at this like relatively small school in our neighborhood here. Real good energy on the picket line. But what the teachers in turn did was they contacted their picket captain for all of West Seattle, like their main coordinator for the strike period, and they donated all of the leftover food and snacks that they had from all of their West Seattle school picket lines. They loaded them all up and like coordinated people to bring them to our supply depot once the tentative agreement was reached and they called off the picket lines. So that example of solidarity, we showed up to support our teachers, to support the union members as they fought for a better contract and one that actually allowed them to live in the places that they work. And in turn, they reciprocated that. They boosted our supplies. It took us almost a year to get rid of all of the granola bars and all the tasty treats that shelf stable stuff that they donated to us. And that's just one more example of that kind of feedback loop that you can get going in a positive direction through mutual aid, right? You don't want it to be a quid pro quo thing, because that's so transactional. But at the end of the day, people aren't going to support a project if they don't know it's there, right? If they don't know that you exist and that you're doing this thing in their neighborhood. So like, we're union members. We support, like, some of us, at least in the project, are union members. We support unions. Many of us who aren't in union shops are doing what we can to try to make them union shops, right? And by showing up on that picket line and showing that love and support for the teachers union at SPS, that in turn gave us connections and let people who are, who better than teachers and educators to know, like, have an idea of what kind of like material instability is like prevailing in the communities they serve, right? Because they see the ones most impacted by it. And that was just a great example of like solidarity really building our base with the mutual aid party.
You said, you don't want it to be quid pro quo. And I so agree with that. And it can be such a hard thing to parse because, one of the organizer associations that I participate with, we talk a lot in the trainings that we do about the difference between a transactional relationship and a transformational relationship. And it can be hard to parse because, while we encourage people to get involved in transformational relationships, those relationships that have the ability to transform the people involved and to transform the situation that they are in. Okay, how am I going to parse it? Like a transactional relationship, right? Like quid pro quo. I'm going to do this for you and you're going to do X in return for me. And there's no reason for that relationship to exist beyond the transaction.
Yep.
And on the other hand, the West Seattle Mutual Aid Party came and did this action with the teachers, not with any expectation of return, right?
That's
but because that's right. Exactly. That's the key. It's like you're doing a thing because you want to do the thing, because you think it is important to do the thing. And you're building relationships, not because you really expect to get anything out of it. Yes. We do get things out of it, right? That's the mutual aid part. We build these relationships. We build this community. We do get things out of it, but that's not the why. The why is because this is the right thing to do. And when you are building things because it is the right thing to do, you do end up getting returns on that. But it's, that's sort of the difference, right? Yes, you should get involved in transformational relationships. You should get to know people to get to know them. You should get to know people in your community because it builds community, but not because you expect to get a thing out of that relationship, right?
Definitely. And I think what you're discussing there goes back towards that initial interaction I was talking about when we're first introducing ourselves to people outside and they're like, oh, you're not with like some kind of like state funded formal organization, is that those interactions that people living outside are having with like state funded service providers are transactional. Like the transaction, like the city shows up to sweep somebody, and in the best case scenario, they might have a tiny home placement to offer them, but that is a transactional thing. It's like you need to get up out of this space where you've have some semblance of community because you got other friends who are living in the street out here, or you got neighbors who are supporting you, like our crew. And the transaction in that interaction is, you gotta, we're tearing your stuff down. You got to get out of here. Another example is the so-called RV safe lot that launched in Seattle within the last year. That is at its core, a transactional process, because you have to sign over your RV to the service provider in order to park it there. And the goal the overall goal that the city is funding is just to remove RVs, like just get them out, like destroy them, right? So they sign them over if you want a safe place to park it, and then the goal is to eventually get rid of it, move you into a tiny home, and progress you through the system, which can work for people. Like, it's good that that is an option for people who are ready for that, but when that's the only option for like 30 or so RVs to park safely in the entire city of Seattle, when there's still hundreds, if not thousands, of vehicle like based residents, like that's just a purely transactional thing. And I think that initial distrust that I was talking about comes from just people being used to the, well, what do you want from me out of this interaction, right? And I'm like, nah, I'm just here to like share supplies and get to know you guys, because it makes, like, I feel safer when I do that, you know? And people immediately recognize that, even if they don't recognize that they're recognizing that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it is something we've lost in our society, and you know, there's a plethora, a host of reasons why we've lost it, but much of it has been, in my opinion, deliberate, right? Like we don't live and work in the same neighborhoods anymore. We spend so much of our time in our single occupancy vehicles. We just, like, fracturing community is a way that the system can ensure that we can't organize together to fight them, right? And that we don't even want to, because we're not used to that idea of like, hey, this is my community, this is my neighborhood, these are my neighbors. These are like, and it's just, instead it others even the people who live right next to you. And it's such important work. I want to, you mentioned sweeps, and I'm maybe sidetracking myself here a bit, but I talk to me about sweeps and the sweep support that that West Seattle Mutual Aid Party does. I admit that I'm going to admit, sweep support is not a thing I've ever done. It's a thing that I'm part of my personality is I am easy to incite. And,
It's good to know your limitations and make sure that you're only like operating in spaces where you can operate at your best capacity, right?
Right. Yeah, no one is going to be helped if I start swearing and throwing things at people who are harming my neighbors, right? Like but yeah, it's really easy for me to get incited. I am not a non-violent person by nature, and I don't want to hurt the causes that I am trying to participate in. So I have not been able to get myself to the point where I feel that I could handle watching my neighbors have their homes destroyed and be terrorized by the violence of the state. But please talk to me about
difficult.
sweep support. Yeah,
it's definitely difficult, and honestly, like I think you and I probably have some overlap as far as like personality types in those kind of situations. Sweep support is tough. Because we lack the material ability to like functionally stop the sweeps. Like there is not enough of an organized presence like across the city to stop the sweeps, especially when over the last 2 years sweeps have been happening at a pace that has not in our lifetimes, at the very least, in any documented measurable way. Like they're happening at a pace that we've never seen before. I can't speak to like, times like when Hoovervilles were still prevalent, and like, that's a different material context in some ways as well. But it's just the sweep machine is so out of control, and the number one priority of the city government above all else, honestly, right now, as far as like resources and what the current elected slate of politicians are like taking as their like operational mandate, is sweeps. And it's just like much of the like politics of fascism it is an aesthetic. It is like an idea and methodology based in aesthetics only. There is no other purpose served from it. Just aesthetics. It's to make the people immediately immediately surrounding a location that gets swept feel better. Meanwhile, it makes other people who live just a little farther down the street feel worse, because now all of a sudden it seems like the problem's getting worse, which it is in different ways. But they're not seeing a new homeless person. They're just seeing a homeless person who got swept from somewhere else. Right now, I just saw a publication, one of the I think it was the San Francisco Chronicle. All of California is in the throes of sweep mania right now as well. All of the so-called liberal centers of California, San Francisco and LA, both are like fully engaged in full sweep like processes, just like Seattle is right now. And I saw an article in the Chronicle interviewing all these people from the outside the downtown and industrial cores who are now complaining about the rising amount of encampments that are showing up in their neighborhood. It's the exact same thing that happened to us here in Seattle. People get pushed out of the more discreet places that they've been more entrenched living without shelter, which here in Seattle, that's the industrial area. SoDo was where most people were located. Before that, it was under the freeway in the old jungle before they swept and partitioned that off. But because of our inability to functionally stop the sweeps, like on a movement level right now, it's this weird space where sweep support really is showing up and assisting the sweep in a lot of ways, which feels really ugly. And it's something that I've been a part of many discussions here in Seattle over the years and this tension is always at the core of it. It's like, we're at this point where we can't physically stop the sweeps. Even if we do rally really hard for one big encampment and postpone the sweep, it is so easy for the state to just wait out popular support until there's enough of a lull that they can come in by power and sweep the location no matter what. So it really kind of, for anyone who was around and activated during the 2020 uprising, you'll probably recognize the catchphrase "be like water," right? As it pertains to street formations and protests, being fluid and dynamic to avoid getting corralled by the police. Honestly, I see that kind of as the preeminent guiding principle for sweep support here right now as well. Is the goal for those of us who support our friends living without shelter, even though functionally we are helping them move out of the area, which is what the state is also wishing them to do in that moment, we are doing so from a place of care and compassion. And our goal is to get them out of that area without losing any of their supplies. Whereas the state's goal is to make this such a nightmare for them that eventually they can't get out in time. And then the state can take and trash their RVs or vehicles they're living in. They can trash their tents and stuff and continue to increase the pain points, which in the state's mind will hopefully drive these folks out of this area. But in reality, what it's going to do is kill them.
Right.
Because at least they're we see it in West Seattle Mutual Aid Program. We see anywhere from 50 to 80 people every Saturday right now. There's a good group of about 20 to 30 people who are lifelong residents of this neighborhood. There's a whole cadre of them who all went to high school together at high schools just down the street from my home here. Many of whom, some of whom worked for state and county agencies here in Seattle before life circumstances led them down a different path. And so what I view our sweep support is doing is we're leveraging our logistical power and our material power that many of us in the network here have as housed people to make sure our friends who are living without shelter aren't losing their belongings in the process of these sweeps. And we're keeping them anchored in our area by helping them get just out of the area of the sweep, because no matter what, right now, the way the sweeps operate, it's a very defined area that they'll tag and they'll sweep people out of. And then it's just a game of moving people out of there. And again, it never feels good to know that functionally we are achieving at least part of the state's goal of the sweep, and it is that aesthetic thing, right? That is the part of the state's overarching goals that we wind up helping facilitate, but we're doing so hopefully in a manner that is most attentive to the needs of our friends, because if we're working with a crew of people at a location and they're we want to fight a sweep, we'll find ways to do that with them. But almost universally, the response tends to be from our friends who are being targeted by a sweep. We just want to get up out of this area without losing our stuff. There's a lot of different circumstances that could make somebody less willing to escalate the confrontation. and a lot of almost all of those are really good reasons, whether that's like previous records that they don't want to run the risk of like getting caught back into the endless loop of the carceral system, or just past traumas dealing with police. There's a lot of good reasons for it. And every time one of our primary locations is getting swept, the main ask we get from people is help us move.
Mhm.
And I think that's reflected in a lot of the work that the broader Stop the Sweeps network is doing in Seattle. And again, it doesn't always feel good, but what does feel good is when we show up at our regular Saturday distro for West Seattle Mutual Aid Party, and we see all of the same people that we know their rigs, their RVs just got tagged, and we helped them move out of a sweep zone the week before, and we still get to see them the next Saturday because we helped facilitate them safely moving out of that area. They didn't lose that community. And the amount of gratitude that we see expressed from our friends who are targeted by sweeps by showing up. And oftentimes the most useful time to support a place being swept is the night before the sweep is supposed to happen, because that gives them time to get stuff packed up without the police just standing there staring at them, without city outreach workers like trying to convince them to take a congregate like cot on the floor shelter bed offering, which is generally the only kind of resource we see getting offered at sweeps these days is congregate shelter. Maybe the city on any given day might have 1 to 5 tiny home spots to offer typically, but that's pretty rare in my personal experience. So yeah, sweep support is often just helping folks move, and doing so from the position of we like you and we want you to stay in this neighborhood if this is where you want to be, so we're going to help facilitate that, rather than we hate you and we hate to see what you have to do to survive, so we want you out of the neighborhood, which is the city's position that they're coming from. So it can be really hard. It's a tough tension, but I also I'm a firm believer personally that tensions, like these kind of tensions in spaces, just like the tension between like incorporating as an NGO and being a more formalized structure versus a little more informal structure, that's a tension as well that we hold in our program. There's a lot of space for creativity, for novel development of ideas and practices within these spaces of tension. So I try to not run from them, as uncomfortable as they can be. I think there's a strong impulse to turn away from tension and conflict. Both like kind of culturally here in Seattle, where we're very like conflict and just like interaction avoidant, like population, I think in a lot of ways, as far as some of our cultural norms go. But like also going back to this idea of atomization that you were talking about earlier, how we're so atomized and like individualized away and isolated from our broader community, even the folks we live right next to. So like sweep support is a way to kind of strike against that, right? It's a way to strike against that drive to atomize us into individuals and instead present ourselves as more of a unified community. And it really blows the mind of our friends being swept still when we show up, like oftentimes, like, so morning of, like talking specifics of what our sweep support often looks like. If we do have a sweep that we feel we need to show up morning of, we usually have somebody make sure we show up with some coffee, some breakfast sandwiches, that helps reduce tensions, making sure people got their immediate material needs met while they're scrambling to do the last of their packing. We help them pack up. We'll do tows if we have the capacity and there is the need for that. But really the most useful thing that we found for sweep support, especially since I should add the context that almost all of the unhoused people that our program sees on a weekly basis are vehicle residents versus like tent or improvised structure residents, which those sweeps not only are conducted by different city entities. RV sweeps are done by an element of Seattle Public Utilities, I believe, whereas tent-based or improvised structure sweeps tend to be handled by Parks and Rec, all of which are organized under something called the Unified Care Team, right? Because we love that Orwellian double speak when it comes to our harmful institutions. I don't see a lot of care coming from the Unified Care Team. I'll say that much. So I do want to like kind of add that caveat that almost everyone that we support who are living without shelter are in vehicles. So our sweep support looks different than if you have a location that's all tent structures. Like your sweeps, you're going to need a lot more vehicles to help people move their stuff, because those people are almost certainly without their own vehicles. That's why they're in tents in the first place. So yeah, like I think we benefit a little bit. I do think vehicle sweeps in some ways are a little easier materially to support in a way that's beneficial to the people who are being targeted by the sweep. But yeah, I will say, going back to your point of what kind of keeps you away from sweep support, if we ever do have next time we got a sweep to deal with in our area, if you're feeling called to it, it's generally more of a relaxed vibe, because we do try to like do the support the night before. It's really just making sure there's a change in disposition of the unified care team workers when they show up and they see there's more random like housed neighbors who have shown up to this sweep than actual like city staffers who are tasked with conducting the sweep. They'll show up all mean and pissed off at the people who they're there to sweep, and then they'll see, oh, there's a group of 10 like housed people here to observe the sweep, and they're here because they like this person whose home I'm trying to take from them. Immediate change in their disposition. They start talking real friendly to us and the people that they're trying to sweep, and that's not always guaranteed. I talk to anybody from Stop the Sweeps, like they're all known to the unified care team at this point. Anybody who shows up with regularity to sweeps is, and there's a lot of like just bad feelings there, rightfully so. So that's not always the case, but we've been fortunate enough to not have too many like open conflicts at sweeps that we've been supporting folks at here in our area of operations. But that isn't representative of the broader scene in the city necessarily. But if you ever do feel like testing the waters with that, you got a good team here at West Seattle Map who can help facilitate that with you, man.
Well, I can't imagine I will avoid it forever, frankly. I am struck by, and I want to try to transition, before we talk too long, to the difference between like the collective versus the incorporated sort of entity. I'm struck by so many of the things you said there. When you talk to some of these conservative clowns, or you hear people from the Orwellian double speak entities like We Heart Seattle, who try to play this game as if there is a homeless industrial complex, is something that I hear them say, and the idea that if you give people resources, you will somehow empower them and facilitate them being homeless. When what we're really talking about is the police industrial complex, right? The police and prisons industrial complex, where the whole fucking point of this game is aesthetic, as you said. And it is because we are atomized, because we don't have real communities here, but we are groups of individuals who live and work and play in different areas, and we don't know our neighbors. And so if you can just disrupt this community of unhoused people, then you will push them to other places, and you'll make those individuals angry and upset and cause them to get on their little apps and report on the find it, fix it thing and try to get a sweep there. And we will divert more and more public dollars, taxpayers' money, to these entities, to the police, to the prisons, to the unified care team, rather than giving them to the citizens. And I'd love to make sure that everyone should know, like, these are citizens of our city. These people, as you said, like, they're people that we see who grew up just down the street. Oh, I grew up in this house. I used to pull plums off that tree, etc. Yep. Right. And so this is the game. We spend tens of millions of dollars every year funneling money into hurting the citizens of Seattle and killing the citizens of the city of Seattle. We have record numbers of people dying on the streets now. And I'm not convinced that even during the Hoovervilles that it was we didn't have the police state. We've never had the police state that we have now. And we've never had so many billions of dollars going into policing and imprisoning the citizens of this nation. And at least in the time of Hoovervilles, a place like the Jungle was allowed to be its own community. People who had fallen on hard times could build their home or shack there. And even now, if we chose to, we could instead make sure that there was garbage there. People talk, oh, it looks terrible and people are shitting in the streets. And well, that's because we've not provided them garbage service and bathroom service. And we could take these tens of millions of dollars and instead enable our most oppressed, most endangered, most desperate neighbors to actually find a way to work themselves out. For a society that pretends that we value people being able to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, we do everything we fucking can to cut their fucking feet off at the ankles and make sure that no one has any ability to pull themselves out of desperation. We just want them in desperation because we want to continually extract money out of the public sphere and funnel it into the private sphere of the most wealthy. Obviously, I'm getting worked up about this whole thing. It is, but I find it infuriating. And so I'm going to use that as a transition, because as an organizer, like when I'm in my organizer association, we do talk about that there is a need to build organizations, to build legal entities, because no matter how much power you generate as a collective of activists, that power only exists as long as that collective has the capacity to keep doing that work. And the way to preserve power beyond that group is to form an actual organization. And there are challenges. And when you form organizations, obviously suddenly the organization as an entity begins to have its own interests that may differ from that of you as an activist. But mutual aid, in my opinion, is a stopgap measure. It's super important. It is less destructive to society than charity is, I believe. And yet, it's not really fixing anything. It is easing the suffering of our most desperate citizens for this moment today. But I don't see that it does anything to change the paradigm that we find ourselves in that is causing that desperation. And I don't see a way to do that beyond at least participating in the system to the point of trying to preserve the power we generate as organizers and find ways to get involved to try to change the system. Like mutual aid, super important. And it's not changing the system. So, talk to me about that, about where you see West Map. I'm trying to parse for myself, right? I'm trying to parse for myself. What is that line between, hey, we're going to be a collective of activists and we're going to do this thing to help our neighbors, and hey, we're organizers who want to fucking change this and not just ease suffering, but change this. So it's not a question, but
I feel the weight of it nonetheless. And I think I definitely see what you're getting at there, Mark. So I think for me and how I kind of conceive of like a project like West Seattle Mutual Aid Party's like broader role in those kind of bigger picture questions is, I don't know where I first picked up this term, as some zine or something, I'm sure, but is this idea of quote unquote creating spaces of encounter, and like the great potential that those spaces have. And once again, this ties back to kind of striking back against this just incessant drive through how everything is structured to atomize us as individuals. Is, I think, the most potential in the terms as far as like kind of like revolutionary politics and organizing goes, for that something like West Seattle Mutual Aid Party brings to the table, is we have created an ongoing and consistent space of encounter for housed and unhoused people alike in our area of operations to start building relationships. And in the course of our day-to-day activities as a program, which is like essentially the maintenance of this like survival program we're doing every Saturday, that itself isn't, it's maintaining, it's allowing some people to hopefully survive a little easier. But like you said, it's not changing power structures. But what it is doing is it's giving us this network and pool of people that I think one of the big tests of my kind of like theory here will be to see, hopefully, we're still kicking and cruising along next time during the next moment of social rupture, which who knows when that's going to be. And what I mean by that is like the most recent example of that being the summer of 2020 and what happened in the immediate aftermath of the events in Minneapolis and the murder of George Floyd. I think what was going to be really interesting to see is what we're able to do with our network the next time a moment like that happens, where there is massive like social uprising. And I think the likelihood of those kind of moments of social rupture actually achieving like lasting, and I won't say permanent, because I know as well as I do, there is no such thing as a permanent victory. The only permanent victories are the ones that we maintain enough power to defend, right? And so I think we I hopefully like having more spaces of encounter like this that are especially critical during moments like this that feel like a lull, right? We're in the downturn after that riotous moment of social rupture that was the summer of 2020 heading into 2021, and everything that happened with COVID and the various uprisings and organizing that happened as a result of that as well. What makes those moments both possible, other than the material elements that lead to them, which are the most important, but I think what really makes those moments possible and creates the potential to achieve actual defensible victories in those moments is having these spaces of encounter cultivated and maintained in the interregnum, right? In the in-between moments between those periods of social rupture and uprising. We have to have these networks, because otherwise, even the most activated and mobilized person from 2020, if once the state like worked its magic and like squeezed the last life out of that, whether it's through the recuperative elements of bringing it back into party politics, the George Floyd Act of Joe Biden or whatever, or anything else, even just the actual state repression that there's so many people still in jail from the uprising, and that demobilizes folks as well. If you don't have a space of encounter like this, what we've built here with West Seattle Mutual Aid Party, you might find yourself demobilized for the rest of your life, because that's where the hopelessness really sets in my experience. Is if you're like a politically aware and like activated person, and you go through a moment like 2020 and you see all of a sudden so much more potential for other ways things could be, right? But then the inevitable happens, and like things slow down, and repression kicks in to full gear, and recuperation happens at 110%, as the political parties are most keenly most keen to do. Having this space of encounter is what really keeps you engaged and keeps you otherwise like mobilized in a different way, right? We're not going to the everyday marches or any of the other activities that were really prevalent in Seattle during the summer of 2020. But what we are doing is staying in touch with each other. We're combating that atomization that really fully demobilizes folks. And I think to tie this in with West Seattle Mutual Aid Party in another way, one of my most favorite things about the collective that we've built and developed here is that there are multiple parents involved in this program. And I don't think I have to tell you guys that, like, if you choose, for folks who become a parent, it's really easy to like essentially age out of political organizing, because so many of these spaces aren't constructed in ways that are conducive to people with children participating in. And that's another one of the most common ways I see really talented organizers, really sharp, critical thinkers, and community-oriented people wind up getting taken out of the community organizing game, because we're not building programs, we're not building spaces of encounter that allow them to stay involved as parents. And the fact that like one of our foundational members is a parent of several very young ones, multiple other parents have gotten involved since, I think speaks very well to this idea of West Seattle Mutual Aid Party as a successful space of encounter for people of all types, not just already radicalized, like politically minded people, not just, the same like core group of organizers that are getting passed around from project to project here in Seattle that are operating at a bigger like city level scale. I think that really goes a long way towards keeping that potential open even during the slower times as far as like social movements go. But you're right, it's one of those core tensions. I myself came into like organizing this project along with one of our other core original members with a lot of experience on the nonprofit side. And while, like you said, that term nonprofit industrial complex is a right-wing like reclaimed word at this time, the first time I was ever introduced to that was from a left critique standpoint of like the nonprofit field. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with one of our local like anti-homeless hate groups, but Safe Seattle is an interesting organization. Interesting meaning disgusting, and totally reprehensible. But the first time I met Mr. David Preston, but Safe Seattle says they're an organization, but it's like one guy spouting hatred for homeless and then collecting whatever any other freaks who agree with his opinions and like a Facebook page, basically. But the first time I met that guy was years back at one of the Nicholsville camps. There was a rupture between the folks living at the camp wanting to assert a higher level of autonomy over how the camp was run versus the service provider that was the sponsor of the encampment. So this was a city sanctioned encampment. And I went into that space. I was invited into that space by the residents of the camp in hopes of helping them like figure out how to coordinate with this service provider to exercise a higher degree of autonomy. And I ran into that guy, David Preston. He showed up because we did an open house. Like the campers organized an open house to invite the community into the camp to hear their concerns about the nonprofit service provider. And he presented himself as an ally in that moment. He's like, yeah, I do a lot of investigative reporting on these nonprofits and all their wasted money. And that was a really appealing, line of thought to me in that moment, because I was there and the campers were mobilized against the nonprofit, right? There is a lot of waste. There's a lot of graft. There's a lot of backroom handshake deals. Like, don't get me started on like organizations like Lehigh that enjoy a near like universal monopoly on like resources and contracts for certain kinds of services here in Seattle. That goes back to deep political connections that they have. And I think that's, whether it's intentional or not, that is one of the core functions that I see the nonprofit industry, especially as it pertains to social services, playing, as it plays into right-wing rhetoric about this stuff, because they do waste a lot of money. There is a lot of like not achieving the goals they say they're intended to, even in the most perfect of examples, as far as a nonprofit is concerned, with like a board that's fully dialed in on the mission, people who are doing the frontline work for them that are 100% like coming from a good perspective and really want to help, which is the case for most of the frontline staff you'll find at nonprofits in my experience. But at the end of the day, there's so much that the state attaches to the grants that they give to these organizations that fund them, and like the provisos that get into these budget line items that create, they hamstring like a good nonprofit's ability to really achieve their goals in a way that is best for the people that are being served. And that in turn allows right-wing commentators such as Safe Seattle to be like, see, they don't work. Why are we spending any of this money when you could probably take a fraction of the overall money that we're dumping into some of these organizations and achieve much better results if it was a more democratically organized process for the people who are receiving those services. So I'm empathetic in a lot of ways, or sympathetic maybe rather, to at least a baseline critique of the quote unquote homeless industrial complex, and that's formed by my own experiences working at the nonprofits. I was working in shelters before I came into my current job, which is still in the same field, just a little less frontline work these days. So like I am sympathetic to that, but and I think that did inform like kind of our initial choice to not incorporate ourselves as an NGO. But I think one of the things that West Seattle Mutual Aid Party has done well is we do have a lot of NGO experience, and I think we've done a good job of bringing some of the more constructive elements that you'll find in like a well-run nonprofit, such as like how we operate our fundraising, and like our regular report backs to donors and stuff. Like I see a lot of elements that you'll see in like traditional like NGO development like position like roles. So again, that takes it back to this idea of it's a tension, right? And we're holding this tension of, we don't want to formalize and like make ourselves like beholden to any entity that we're like writing grants and receiving grants from. And like, we don't want to reduce the people, our friends that we're and neighbors that we're supporting every week to just numbers that we're tabulating in order to like chase down more funding. So we have that as a core ethos of our group. Simultaneously, the IRS exists, right? Like, so, like we have shared resources that we like are pooling, and we need to figure out how to manage that. And we don't necessarily even do that well, right? Like it's always a constant battle, especially making sure we got everything. But that's where our partners at Northwest Hospitality came in. And one of the things that stood out to us was we were introduced to them by some other mutual aid programs that they were supporting in a similar way. So there was already at least some kind of like proof positive as far as how they were interacting with similarly organized mutual aid programs that didn't want to incorporate themselves as a nonprofit, but recognize the need to have a fiscal sponsor for tax deductible donations and to have like receipted like expenditures like reported to, as well as the other resources that they might offer. And so, we worked that out, and that wasn't just like one meeting and we're done, we're ready to set it up with them. We had to talk it through with them. And one of the things that encouraged us is in specifically as it relates to Northwest Hospitality was, seeing some of the other work they do in their own community. They're based primarily over in Kitsap County, as far as like their on the ground operations, and they have like a mobile clothing truck. They do all sorts of cool, like mutual aid oriented stuff over there as well. And they firmly believe in like our mission and support us in like operating the way we want to operate while providing us with the structure to make sure we're not running afoul of any tax law or anything like that. So it feels like a good like middle ground. But I've also heard horror stories, fiscal sponsor relationships between like non-incorporated projects like ours, where, there's different legal mechanisms where like if you have money that was donated through a fiscal sponsor, like the fiscal sponsor has that money and they're dispersing it to you as you can show like, the correct type of expenditures to it. And like that can go sideways. And that, that's one of the reasons why, despite how wonderful Northwest Hospitality has been and like how strong our relationship continues to be with them and productive that this relationship with them has been, we always try to make sure we're maintaining some of our other like mechanisms for fundraising that are fully under our control, because you never know when something like that might not work out. It could just be a change in board members that all of a sudden they close down that 501(c) that has the fiscal sponsor money under and relaunch it as something new, but they can't give that money back to us. I was just reading about another project that happened to earlier this week, so it's fresh on my mind.
Yeah, so I'm gonna call, or Adam's got Northwest Hospitality on the ticker right now. For those of you who are just having us pour into your ear holes, there's a website. We'll have it in the episode description. It's nwhospitality.org/WSMAP for West Seattle Mutual Aid Party. If you need to do a tax deductible donation, please, head that direction and drop the money there. But then you've got the other donation site. I want to, just spend a hot second. We've been talking a little over an hour now. And so I, want to start winding things up. I want to make sure that people know where they can direct help for the project. So we've got a Patreon. You have a Patreon. you being West Seattle Mutual Aid Party, I guess we have a Patreon. I'm trying to
Yeah,
differentiate.
you're in this boat too now, man.
But trying to differentiate the West Seattle Mutual Aid Party we from the Rise Up with Marc Mixon we, who also in theory has a Patreon. I've not been there in a long time, but go to patreon.com/mutual aid party to offer direct support.
Yep.
And I say that direct support. I know that you, as well as I, sort of self-identify as anarcho. And I want to, one of the reasons I identify as anarcho is that I have in my life somehow developed this belief that many of our divisions are astroturfed and propaganda that has been pushed on us by the establishment, and that if a community is given the power and the resources to address problems directly, they usually will do so successfully. And you talked about sort of the nonprofit industrial complex, and it is a thing, like I mentioned, that once you form an organization, suddenly that organization as an entity begins to have its own interests.
Cybernetic almost in nature, like it becomes self-aware and self-fulfilling.
It has things it needs to do. It wants to survive and propagate, and there are things it must do within this system to do that. And it can begin to, that can feed into this whole waste, as you mentioned. But it will hire staff, and it will start chasing grants, and it will start doing these things to help keep itself alive, even if it was in theory formed to help keep someone else alive. And suddenly, right, those funds begin to get diverted, and yet we can't rely on charities and religious organizations to provide that, because quite frankly, society ought to be providing that aid to the members of the society, right? So let me rein myself in and try to get back to the so it's this interesting dichotomy. And attention is a great way to put it. I think you hit that fucking right on the head. And I don't have a solution to it. Part of me feels that we would be in a better world if somehow our nonprofit organizations were focused, not solely, but we're far more focused on applying pressure to the establishment and to those politicians rather than providing the services. Because when the nonprofit is providing the services, suddenly it becomes a diversion of resources to the nonprofits as opposed to the services. And it would be a great step in the right direction, I feel, if the nonprofit organizations were about applying pressure to the politicians and to the system and to getting the laws changed, whereas communities themselves were able to get the direct influx of resources and power to address their issues. Like if the neighborhood could, if we divided up the fucking tens of millions of dollars that we extract from the public coffers to give to policing and service organizations, and we're instead giving that money directly to the neighborhoods that are struggling and the communities that are struggling, and invite them to, hey, solve these problems. Here is the money and resources, and we as an organization will take your solutions, and we will try to force City Hall to enact these things and to preserve your solutions, rather than we're going to do this for you. We might be in a better scenario.
Definitely. As it stands right now, what you instead tend to see is, I think a recent example here in Seattle we have of that was the initial ballot measure for the social housing entity here in Seattle. Like we had there was Lehigh gave mixed messaging, and I think within a week before the official vote was the voting was ended for that initial ballot measure, they wound up saying, no, we support it. But they were very cagey about whether or not they supported it as the preeminent low income housing provider here in Seattle. we do see some advocacy from the larger organizations, but it almost always is in service of like maintain the status quo because they're getting funded through the status quo. But it's a matter of scale, right? You won't see that necessarily with smaller organizations where like they don't have, you know, hundreds of employees that are dependent on them not losing like good faith or good, like a friendly disposition with the current city council, you know. And for my own employer, you know, I don't want to disclose like exactly what my job is, but it's in the same field. And I'm so happy that you mentioned like the advocacy key, because this is one of the things that internally I've been like fighting for is like, why are we not like publishing like op-eds like to encourage like more of what we need in order to allocate more resources directly to people? Like we are one of like, it's a big entity, and there's like it's their participation in public policy discussion is zero. And I don't understand it whatsoever, because while the resources we're allocating are like granted to our organization by somebody, it's not at the city level. And because of that, that gives like this organization a lot of power over the city. Like the city can't say like, well, you're not going to get money from us if you don't like agree with like whatever the current city council wants. My organization's free of that. So why aren't we like saying, no, this is what you should be doing? Because this is what is going to allow us to allocate the resources we get from elsewhere better in your community. Instead, it's like we're afraid to rock the boat. And I definitely agree with you. Like nonprofits are going to exist as long as we're like cutting, like the right wing is cutting down the quote unquote administrative state as much as possible. It's always going to be the most useful things the state does first that they're trying to cut, leaving all the most monstrous, useless elements of it as like the final like skeleton of it. But so as long as these nonprofits exist and as long as there are good people working in them, which there are, even at the worst ones, there's a lot of good people working for them because they have that emotional appeal to good-natured people. Don't you care about the mission? And a lot of people do. And they show up to work almost minimum wage level job, entry level positions in a highly like traumatic environment. And they do as good of a job as they are given the tools to do oftentimes. Not all the time. There's a lot of monsters working in some of these orgs too, just like anywhere else. But the advocacy piece is missing because they're either afraid to rock the boat or they're on that boat. And if that gets rocked, they're afraid they're going to lose their power. So yeah, like again, it's a tension. And for as sharp as my critique of the nonprofit industrial complex is, it is ultimately where I'm making my bread and butter as a worker, right? Like I'm still getting that money, and I'm not a believer of changing things from the inside. I don't think that is a paradigm worth paying much attention to at all. But on the other side, I do think that as long as like these nonprofit entities exist, as like pretty much the only like access point for state like funded resources, the people like the folks who need these resources do deserve competent and good-natured people to be working at these entities. And that's where I make my peace with it as much as I can for some of the stuff I got to do in my day-to-day as a worker. And that's all really why I do the mutual aid program, because I work in the industry and I run up against all the limitations in the day-to-day operations of my job. And it, rather than just letting that like slowly kill me and like take away the energy that I have for this kind of work, it informs my mutual aid work and gives me the energy to do that more frontline oriented work. And then the mutual aid work that in turn encourages me to show up to my day job and to actually give a damn about it and to work as hard as possible every day at my job. Because even though I understand very sharply the limitations of how like the program I work for is administered, I also understand what the consequences are of somebody at one of these agencies not answering their phone call when the person living in the RV is desperately calling them to try to understand what the status of their paperwork is or anything else. There's really sharp consequences, sometimes quite literally life or death, as we have fortunately have come to know at West Seattle Mutual Aid Party. We have regulars that we've lost like in just the 2.5 years we've been doing this. And I think about them honestly. It might sound kind of trite almost, but I think about them every day when I show up to work, and I think about how different it could have been if somebody, you know, who could have worked a little harder, you know, in the course of their day job in order to make sure that they got the services they needed. So it feeds into each other for me personally. And like there is a tension at the center of it, but I think there is a mutually beneficial element to that as well. I think both ends of that equation make me operate at both sides of those better, you know?
Yeah, I appreciate, I could, okay, I'm pausing, reeling in. It's been, because I feel like I could talk with you about
I've
this all
enjoyed
day.
this, man.
But we've been going for close to an hour and a half now, and I gotta wrap it up. And not only because I have Medic Viv who's doing some distro of Riot Medicine books downtown, and I gotta get with them to make sure that we settle on where we're going to do the next training. So I'm gonna wrap this up, and it might take a minute because I want to. You mentioned that you really liked that West Seattle Mutual Aid Party was sort of hyper local, and that your mutual aid work was hyper local, and I'm going to wrap this into my call to action somehow here. It'll might wander a moment. You also mentioned like doing the citywide stuff, and a lot of activists on the left I've noticed have run into this, and it's almost a trauma they're carrying about how few of us seem to be doing the work. And I run into circles where there's a lot of energy put into, well, I've got to convince everyone to do my thing because there's only so many of us. And if we don't all band together and do the same thing, then we'll never get anything accomplished. And I see that repeated in so many different forums and in so many different aspects of the work. And what I found with West Seattle Mutual Aid Party thus far is already, I've only been with y'all for a few months, and already I have seen multiple instances of people who really have not done a whole lot of mutual aid work at all getting involved, because there is something different about making sure that this is a hyper local, that this is our neighborhood. These are our neighborhoods. We are just down the street, around the bend. We shop in the same places. We go to school in the same places. We know the same parks, and there is a reward of seeing tangible results in your neighborhood that I think is bearing fruit about reactivating people, or not even about just activating people, right? And building these relationships. I at its core, I think that's what organizing is building the relationships needed to make change. And I feel like this hyper local effort is a way to do it, and is a way to grow the movement and grow the work that we are all engaged in, so that it's not the same small group of activists who are all competing with each other for time and resources. So I applaud that, and I'm super proud to be working with Mutual Aid
Really
Party.
great having you as a part of it these last few months, man.
And I want to talk, for a hot second to all the people who are listening and or who are on the live stream right now, because I forgot for about an hour that we were live streaming. So as we wrap up, go ahead and hit your like button and keep following us. But also, if you find that you are upset about a thing, if there's an issue in your life that is causing you angst, I guarantee that there are others in your community, in your neighborhood, who feel the same way. And there are ways to get involved, and there are groups doing the work right now in your community, and you can get involved. In fact, if you don't get involved, this will never change, right? We've talked about whether it's the police state, whether it's the political class, whether it's the billion-dollar corporate entities and class, like all of these structures, the nonprofit industrial complex, all of these structures have their own interests, and it's not fixing the problems in your society. And if you don't get involved and work to change these things, they will not change. They will only continue to exacerbate and get worse. Like this is not a movie. This is not a TV show, and it's not a spectator sport. This is our lives and our communities, and we are responsible for making the changes because there's no one coming to save us, right? And we can make the changes. That's why all those other entities spend so much time and so much money trying to split us up, trying to divide us, trying to distract us, trying to propagandize us, trying to other us and make sure you feel like, hey, the reason I'm suffering is that guy right there. It's the homeless person. It's the person from outside my community. It's the person who has a different color skin than I do. It's a person who has a different religion or a different country of origin. Like all of those things are fucking lies that the establishment tells us because they know we can beat them. We can rise up and change these things if we will get together and if we will get organized. And so I implore everyone out there, like, you can get involved. There are people in your community that will help you to get involved. Reach out to us, reach out to people, post in your local, like, curate your socials so that you're following and talking with people who are actually
Buy Nothing groups.
Hit those Buy Nothing groups. Talk to the real people who want to do things. Absolutely. Because that's the only way we're going to get change. You know, you gotta get out there and you got to do the work. So that's my call to action for today, which, you know, I sometimes get tired of my call to actions because it's the same call to action. It's the same call to action every week. It's like, get involved and get busy and get doing the things and work on the problem that you find gives you the most grief, the most angst, because you can make a difference.
Absolutely. And people will find you. Like, people, if what you're doing resonates with people, they will see you doing it and they will ask you, hey, what are you up to? How can I help you do this? We have had multiple people join our program and become like long-term like organizers and supporters of what we do, who just literally drove by one day while we were doing it. And they're like, hey, that looks pretty neat. You know, if you build it, they will come, you know, to quote the movie, right? The more you do, the more of those spaces of encounter, and it's not always going to work. You know, you can't be afraid of failing either. But as long as you're doing it with other people in your community and iterating on that and learning from it, it still is an exercise in building power. Because even if you don't get the desired result or outcome, you are learning and you're doing it together, most importantly. So that's the only supplement I'd add to your call to action. Like, if you do it, people will want to join you and figure out how to make it better and just keep pushing forward. It's kept me from losing. Hope's a loaded word. I try to avoid hope just as a concept because it feels pretty weighty in like the times that we're living in. But it keeps me motivated and it gives me the motivation I need to wake up every day. It gives me the motivation to feel strong and empowered in my community. And I'm just really grateful for having found the opportunity and found others who feel the same way I do. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity to come on with you guys and discuss this with you all because of everything I've been a part of over the years. And I've been a part of some cool stuff. West Seattle Mutual Aid Party feels different in a way that other projects I've been a part of have not. It's scratching an itch for me that I can't even quite put my finger on. And I really hope that everyone else involved is getting something similar out of it. Because that, as far as the internal like dynamics go, that's the single most important like data point for me is, does this feel like a good use of your time? Like, that's it. And I think 2.5 years into it, it is for a lot of people. So, yeah.
Excellent. Well, Pig, thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah, Adam, thank you as always for facilitating this and helping make this happen, talking me into the whole concept of the show. And
yeah, no worries. It's a fun time.
Yeah. No, I'm having a good time. I'm having great conversations, and I think it is helping that core goal of building relationships. So So, and if you're out there listening, thank you so much for joining us and for listening. And I encourage you to not just join us next time, but get involved in your communities. And together, we can all find ways to rise up.
Absolutely. Already. Thank you guys.
All right. Thank y'all.
Some answers, a little bit of truth. Some answers, a little bit of truth.